Alright, so to finish up this slide, the peasant class were the ones who worked the land that belonged to either the king or the temples. So the peasant class, they didn't own their own land. They were basically sort of tenant farmers of the king's land, and they were paid in most of the time food and maybe a little bit of currency as well. And then, lowly enough to not even get their own class, are the Sumerian slaves. So these are people taken from other lands, or maybe people who had committed crimes. They would be the people who would be serving as slaves in Sumer. Okay, let's talk about Sumerian religion. So, obviously the religion's going to be mostly polytheistic in these early civilizations. And in Sumer, like a lot of other places, the gods were thought to control every aspect of your life. So if something was going wrong, you would pray to the gods specifically to fix that thing. And the duty of the people was to keep the gods happy. So whatever it took to keep gods happy, like a sacrifice or a certain ceremony, they would do it. And the ziggurat, like you should know from your vocab, is basically a temple or a church, and it was usually dedicated to the chief god or goddess in that city-state. So, it was dedicated to one specific god, and that was their main god that they worshipped. But then they had other gods that, were over, like the god of fertility, or the sun god, or the god of the harvest, and stuff like that. So if there was a certain thing going wrong in their lives, like they needed more rain or they needed more sun, then they would pray to the god that controlled the weather to fix that part of their life. Sumerians also believed in the afterlife, so they believed that there was a life after you died, and they most of the time prepared their rulers for that with sort of like the mummification process in Egypt, where they kind of packed all their best goods and belongings into the tomb with them so they could take them into the afterlife. Alright, and probably one of the most important aspects of Sumer is their writing. So in 3200 BC, Sumerians actually invented their form of writing, and this is actually one of the first systems of writing in the whole in world history. So we call it cuneiform, and basically it's a wedge-shaped mark in clay tablets. And scribes, who were the people who were able to write, went through years and years of schooling. So they went through regular school, and then if the powers that be thought that you were smart enough to be a scribe, you would go through like 7 or 12 more years of school to learn the writing in order to be a scribe. And scribes were seen as pretty awesome people because they were usually super smart, super talented, and they held a lot of the power in Sumer because they were the ones who wrote things down. So this is what it looks like. Basically, it's a clay tablet that is sort of still wet, and they would use their, for want of a better word, their pencil, their writing utensil, and like press marks into the clay and then leave it out in the sun to dry. So let me show you, let's see. Alright, so this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So the story that I was telling you about earlier, this is the Epic of Gilgamesh written in cuneiform. So you can tell it looks like a whole lot of work, and there's not really any room for error. So, that's cuneiform. Alright. Okay, so in Mesopotamia, remember Sumer is a city in Mesopotamia, so we're still talking about the same place. But in Mesopotamia, invasion was what usually started new rule. And one of the most famous rulers in Mesopotamia was Hammurabi, and he ruled about 1790 BCE, And by this time, he was able to control most of Mesopotamia. So, the main city of Sumer plus all the area that surrounded it. And Hammurabi is most famous for Hammurabi's Code. And this is a set of 282 laws, so almost 300, that were actually the first laws to ever be written down. And of course, they were written in cuneiform. But these laws, they were civil law and criminal law. So civil law is private rights to protect the powerless. So if somebody stole something, they would be breaking civil law. And criminal law is offenses against the others. And in Hammurabi's Code, they set specific punishments for specific offenses. So this is where we see that phrase come about, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that kind of thing. That's what Hammurabi's Code is. And we'll come back to this slide, but let me show you some of his code. Alright, so it says, if a judge try a case, reach a decision, and present his judgment in writing, if later error shall appear in his decision, and it be through his own fault, then he shall pay 12 times the fine set by him in the case, and he shall be publicly removed from the judge's bench, and never again shall he sit there to render judgment. So that's basically saying if a judge tries a case and later on it's found that he judged it wrongly, then he's going to have to pay 12 times the fine that he gave to the person who lost the case, and he's also going to lose his job. Alright, so that's, a pretty specific punishment for a pretty specific offense. Alright, so if anyone owe a debt for a loan, and a storm prostrates the grain, or the harvest fail, or the grain does not grow back for lack of water, in that year he need not give his creditor any grain. He washes his debt tablet in water and pays no rent for this year. Alright, so this means that if someone owes a debt and their crops don't grow that year, or a disaster happens and they don't get any money that year, that they don't have to pay that year. They don't have to pay their debtor that year. And where it says he washes his debt tablet in water, that's, in cuneiform. So, they were clay tablets, and they were, pretty sturdy as long as they were dry, but once you dipped them in water, you were able to kind of smooth it all out again, and it looked like you never wrote on it. So he washes his debt tablet in water means that it's like there was never any debt for that year. Alright, let's see. So you see some more here. This one down here on the bottom is probably the most wow of these. It says, if a builder build a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall in and kills its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. So that's saying if a builder has built a house and he didn't build it correctly and it falls through, that he will be put to death if the owner of the house is also killed. Alright, so Hammurabi also improved the system of irrigation in Mesopotamia. So he figured out ways to, get water pumped into the cities. And he also organized an army. And an interesting thing about Hammurabi is that he mandated religious unity in Mesopotamia. So this meant that he made everybody start to worship the same God. And in this case, that god was Marduk. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about Babylon. Babylon is another city in Mesopotamia. If you look over here, so we talked about Sumer. This is Sumer here. And this is Babylon here. So they're not far from each other. Okay, so Babylon was built into an empire under King Nebuchadnezzar, and some of you may be familiar with King Nebuchadnezzar from the Bible. So that's maybe where you heard that name before. But Nebuchadnezzar was a pretty strong ruler. He was able to rebuild canals. He built more temples. He built tons of walls and palaces in Babylon. And he surrounded Babylon with a defensive moat and a brick wall to protect them against their enemies.